My wonderful people, you're welcome back to the channel. This is Uglo Fashion, and today we'll be learning how to make this bonus sleeve dress with bow knot hem. You can see how lovely it is on my model, so please stay tuned to the end and enjoy the tutorial. If you are new here, please subscribe to the channel, like and share the video as well. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you very much for always stopping by. Love you all. This is the fabric I'll be using for this tutorial, and I've already drafted the bodice pattern. I first measure 1/2 inch just to shape out the rough edge, and I folded the fabric into 2 as well. So from there, I went ahead to measure 9.5 inch, which is the bust nipple point. The under bust is 13.5, and also the half length is 15.5. I chalked those ones out. Then for the hip length, I measured 24. The knee length, I used 34, and the gown length is 39 inches. But because of the bow knot that is at the hem, so I'll just subtract 2 inches for the bow knot. Then what I will have left will be 37. So I'll subtract 2 inches from the normal gown length to make the bow knot. Then I added half for the joining. So here I measured the circumference of the nipple point, which is 34, circumference of the under bust divided by 4, circumference of the half length also is divided by 4. Every other part is divided by 4 aside from the shoulder. So for the hip, the circumference of the hip is 38 divided by 4. But to get the circumference of the knee length, I subtracted 2 inches from the circumference of the hip. The reason I used 2 inches is because the fabric is not stretchy, that's one, and secondly, there's no split at the back. So for easy access to work, I just subtracted 2 inches, and I don't want the down part also to be too pencil, so I make use of 36 there divided by 4. Back to the nipple point, I added 1/2 inch. To the under bust, I added 1/2 inch to every other part for ease. So I'm making use of this 1/2 inch. I'm going to stitch on it. The reason is the style is not really firm, it's not too firm, so I connected the 1/2 inches, and also I added another 1 inch for my usual allowance. You know, before I usually use 2 inches, but this fabric I'm not adding any lining to it, so I only need the 1 inch just for the allowance. And I connected that as well. And mind you, there's no dots in this style. Then back to the shoulder, I measured the circumference of the shoulder divided by 2. Then from that point, I came down with 7 inches, marked half there, marked 1 inch here, then connected everything, marked 4.5 here. Then I connected everything together. That's for the shoulder. So I went ahead to cut it out. After cutting, I placed it back on the fabric to cut the back bodies. That's because both has the same shape. There's no zipper allowance, neither is there any split at the back. So I labeled this part the back, while this is the front. So having done that, I went ahead to cut the neckline. So for the neckline, I used 3.5 inches I remember I have both my front and back bodies together here, so I'll just come down with 1 inch and I connected that. I cut that out. After cutting, I went to the shoulder and I marked 1 inch for the shoulder slope and I connected it back to the neckline. I cut that out as well. So after cutting, I notched the middle of the neckline. Then I separated the front from the back bodies. So for this style, since I'm not making use of any zipper, I used button. So for the button hole, I measured 7 inches and opened that part. So that's where the button will be fixed. I later placed the remaining fabric on the table to cut the sleeve. So I folded it into 4. At first I folded into 2. I later fold back into 4. And I trimmed the rough edge off. So for the sleeve, I measured the length. The length I worked with 16 inches. Remember, there's still a bow knot there, so I'll be using 2 for that as well, which means the real measurement of the sleeve is 18 inches. So, but for the straight one before the bow is 16. So I went ahead to measure our usual 2 inches, our bicep, which is 5, then the elbow, which is 10. And at this side, I measured half because there is opening at the sleeve as well. I measured half, then I connected it from that point to the 16 inches. So I tried to rule everything out to make it more visible. So at the bicep, I measured the circumference there divided by 2. At the elbow also, I measured the circumference divided by 2, and I did the same for the arm. I connected it with the ruler. I connected the lines together. So also I went ahead again to measure 1 inch for allowance. So after connecting the allowance, the circumference I have at the bicep, I extended it to the 2 inches I measured at first. Then I added 1 inch extra, just the usual way we normally do for our armhole. Then from this up here, I just measured 3 inches and I started my cuff shape. So if you have your French cuff, this will make it easier for you. So after connecting that, I cut everything out. So this ½ inch is just to be stitched. You will get it better while stitching everything together. So I opened the middle, the ½ inch, I opened it. So I later brought back the back bodice. I've forgotten before, so I brought it back to reshape the neckline of the front, and I came down with 5 inches. So I'm using this bias tape for the neck. So I went ahead to stitch the bias tape, and I also used it for the back. So for the back, since there is a button attached to the back, I just fold the bias into 2, then stitch on it. So after stitching, I cut 2 inches. So at first I stitched the bias. You can see the way I folded it for the button. So I stitched this at first. So after stitching on it, I went ahead to stitch the bias to all the other side of the neckline. So I went ahead to hem the neckline, the bias down, so there won't be any need of top stitching since I've hemmed it down. I did the same for the back as well. The next thing I did was I stitched the shoulder together. Having done with that, I went ahead to stitch the half that I added as the ease. After stitching one side, I left the other side. I left few inches open, like 4 inches. I left 4 inches open. So I went ahead to fold it this way. I fold it into 2, then I stitched that. After stitching, for the bow knots, I measured 5 inch. Reason being, I'll fold half on both sides, then folding half. After that, I will have my 2 inches. I'm going to fold this into 2 anyways. Then I just doubled the measurement, the total circumference that I used for the knee length. I doubled it. So if you want your knot to be long, your bow knot to be very big or longer than this, you can multiply your knee length by 3. That's optional. So I placed the bow knots on the hem of the fabric of the dress, and I stitched. So I went ahead to fold again. So to stitch the remaining on the dress, I folded it this way, but it would be advisable that you use your iron to first ironed like ½ inch, so you just place on top of the fabric and stitch at once. But if you can do it the way I did mine, you are good to go. So after stitching, this is what I have. Then I later shape the armhole. So for the sleeve, I joined like 3 inches together. I stitch everything together. Then the remaining I folded this way. Just do it the way I did mine. You fold into 2, then I stitch on it. So after stitching, I stitched the measurement as well. Then for the bow knots on the sleeve, I pinned the middle together. I notched the middle. I did the same for the M. So I notched the middle and I pinned them together. I notched the middle of the sleeve as well, and I pinned the two together. And I went ahead to stitch. So I ironed this side, then I just placed it on my sleeve. So this is the result I have at the end of the day. The next thing now is just to stitch my